If we do not stand up for the sovereign rights of any nations or states when they are undermined and wantonly violated, then which one of us are safe or are guaranteed protection by the principles of the Charter and international law?
Since 1947, the United States foreign policy has repeatedly employed force, covert action, and political manipulation to bring about regime change in other countries. This is a matter of carefully documented historical record. In her book, Covert Regime Change, political scientist Lindsay O'Rourke documents 70 attempted U.S. regime change operations between 1947 and 1989 alone.
Let's look at the Maduro conversation from Dr. Jeffrey.
I now give the floor to Mr. Jeffrey Sachs.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, the issue before the Council today is not the character of the government of Venezuela. The issue is whether any member state, by force, coercion, or economic strangulation, has the right to determine Venezuela's political future or to exercise control over its affairs. This question goes directly to Article 2, Section 4 of the United Nations Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The Council must decide whether that prohibition is to be upheld or abandoned. Abandoning it would carry consequences of the gravest kind. Let me offer some background. Since 1947, the United States foreign policy has repeatedly employed force, covert action, and political manipulation to bring about regime change in other countries. This is a matter of carefully documented historical record. In her book, Covert Regime Change, political scientist Lindsay O'Rourke documents 70 attempted U.S. regime change operations between 1947 and 1989 alone. These practices did not end with the Cold War. Since 1989, major United States regime change operations undertaken without authorization by the Security Council have included, among the most consequential, Iraq 2003, Libya 2011, Syria beginning in 2011, Honduras 2009, Ukraine 2014, and Venezuela from 2002 onward. The methods employed are well established and well documented. They include open warfare, covert intelligence operations, instigation of unrest, support for armed groups, manipulation of mass and social media, bribery of military and civilian officials, targeted assassinations, false flag operations, and economic warfare. These measures are illegal under the UN Charter, and they typically result in ongoing violence, lethal conflict, political instability, and deep suffering of the civilian population. In the words of the Charter, the UN was created, quote, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. Given that we are in the nuclear age, failure cannot be repeated. Humanity would perish. There would be no third chance. To fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter, the Security Council should immediately affirm the following actions. The United States shall immediately cease and desist from all explicit and implicit threats or use of force against Venezuela. The United States shall terminate its naval quarantine and all related coercive military measures undertaken in the absence of authorization by the UN Security Council. The United States shall immediately withdraw its military forces from within and along the perimeter of Venezuela, including intelligence, naval, air, and other forward deployed assets positioned for coercive purposes. Venezuela shall adhere to the UN Charter and to the human rights protected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Secretary General, I recommend, should immediately appoint a special envoy mandated to engage relevant Venezuelan and international stakeholders and to report back to the Security Council within 14 days with recommendations consistent with the Charter, and the Security Council should remain urgently seized of this matter. All member states should refrain from unilateral threats, coercive measures, or armed actions undertaken outside the authority of the UN Security Council. In closing, Mr. President and distinguished members of the Council, Peace and the survival of humanity depend on whether the United Nations Charter remains a living instrument of international law or is allowed to wither into irrelevance. That is the choice before this council today. Thank you very much.
Okay, so obviously that was Dr. or Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And after listening to that, there is no doubt that America has been in the business of overthrowing governments and changing regimes as they pleases. But that time for America is over. I think they made a mistake with Maduro, to be quite honest, because even though there is an admission that Maduro has been involved in things that were not good for his citizens and so on, but at the moment, every single person and every single, like from Europe to, like Asia, every single leader is actually against America because, come on, America is in no position to be able to actually decide who is doing something good because they have been involved in so many. Like, should I mention?
When I look at my own country, the United States, it is a semi-democratic, white-dominated, hierarchical, racist society that aims to preserve privilege by the elites. That's how it was formed in 1787. It was a slave-owning, genocidal country, killing Native Americans for a white culture. But amazingly, it still looks that way. Although we're much more diverse now than we were. The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You could be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more
stop
women
now.
and more
Let's
wars.
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done. For us to understand where this entire war came from. It did not come from Bashar al-Assad. It came from Washington. There was a decision in 2011 to overthrow Assad. Actually, that came from Jerusalem. This has been a desire of the Israeli government that stretches back more than 25 years. Netanyahu's idea is make the Middle East in Israel's image, overthrow every government that opposes Israel.
Like the weapon of mass destructions where they unalive 1 million Iraqis? Should I actually go there? So yeah. So and now I'm actually going to put the representative, the South African representative, and it's quite convenient that it's actually a white, and I'm not saying this like in a race, versus whatever in that sense. But I'm just saying that the funny thing about it is that Trump accused South Africa just recently of a white genocide, yet the person representing them, at the United Nations meeting that was held because of what Trump did was actually a white South African, and he spoke very well against Trump. And I'm really, really proud of that. I know that there's, like things in South Africa that shouldn't, be happening and so on. But I feel like white and black South Africans are trying to walk, hand in hand with each other. And I want you to listen to this.
The stability of the international system depends not only on the respect, but on the consistent application of these established legal norms. We all benefit from a rules-based international order based on international law. When we break those norms, we invite anarchy and an environment where might makes right, ignoring the complexity of interrelations and interdependence in our modern world. Mr. President, the unilateral military strikes carried out by the United States of America against Venezuela and the abduction of President Nicolas Maduro and his spouse from Venezuelan territory for transfer to the United States wantonly violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence of Venezuela. These actions are also in stark contrast to our established legal norms. reinforcing the belief that might is right, and undermining diplomacy. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepen crises. Unlawful unilateral force of this nature undermines the stability of the international order and the principle of equality among nations. Such use of force also undermines the institutional infrastructure established to regulate relations among nations. We have seen examples of these in Libya, Iraq, and countless cases in Africa where foreign interventions and interference create security crises and undermine national governance institutions cultivated through nuanced and complex national contexts. Mr. President, each one of our countries, including our peoples, that are members of this organization and that are bound to its charters, have the right to determine our own democratic and political path. This inherent charter-given right to self-determination cannot and should not be abrogated. If we do not stand up for the sovereign rights of any nations or states when they are undermined and wantonly violated, then which one of us are safe or are guaranteed protection by the principles of the Charter and international law? Failure to act decisively against such violations is a tantamount to inviting anarchy and normalizing the use of force and military might as the main form of discourse in international politics. This would be a regression into a world preceding the United Nations, a world that gave us two brutal world wars, and an international system prone to severe structural instability and lawlessness. We cannot afford to proceed into a complex future without the stability and protection afforded by international law. I thank you.
Isizwe sabathu,